What are the common pitfalls of hiring? What's a kingmaker? Should one use a recruiter? What investors look for when they assess the whole team? Would it be relevant to start building an option pool? How has the macro environment affected business teams in early stage? Hello, good morning. Lovely seeing this amount of people here. Welcome to our community breakfast. I see you've all found a cup of coffee and something to have a bite on. If there's people who don't have a seat, you can also take a seat by the window. We've got a big window still there. And there's some empty seats at the very back. Someone's looking for company. You can take a seat there. Let's kick in. Today we've got Lauri from Inventure here to tell you about talents and hiring and whatnot. I'll just let him take over. Lauri, please, do you mind introducing yourself a bit?
For sure. Great seeing you, such a big group this morning. I'm Lauri from Inventure. Maybe a couple words of Inventure. So we're the largest seed stage focused venture capital fund in the Nordics. We've done 80 investments in the area. The ones that you would know could be Wolt, where we're the first investor, Swappie as well, but bunch of B2B companies that you maybe don't know today. We raised our fourth fund last year, 150 million euro fund, where we're investing also in pre-seed. So we invest anything between 300,000 to 5 million euros as initial ticket. Team of 18 based in Helsinki and Stockholm, and try to support our founders, especially around the themes of talent and expansion. And that's why talking more about the talent angle here today. Myself started with Inventure 7.5 years ago as an intern, came in, and then 3 months have turned into a long career in VC. So joined then the partnership also in 1 year ago, and now sitting in the board of 7 different startups, Swappie being one of them. That's in brief.
Thank you. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Josephine from the Maria 01 team. I work with our networks here, so mainly partners and investors. So let's kick in. Talking about the current environment, could you please elaborate on how has the macro environment affected business teams in early stage?
Yeah, I think during my time in VC, it used to be always about growth, and now suddenly, January last year, the narrative has kind of changed. Now we're looking into what's your burn rate. Of course, still looking at growth, but it's been a lot more profitability focused. And of course, the reason is that the funding environment has totally changed. If we look at the statistics only from this year, layoffs.fyi, which is one of the open source platforms tracking how many people have been laid off. Only in tech this year, there has been 120,000 people laid off. So that's thousands every single working day. In our portfolio, the same trend can be easily spot out. If you look at the employment growth from 2020 to 21, it was around 84%. But if you look at from 21 to 22, it was around 4%. So a third of our portfolio companies have been laying off people last year. And that's, I think, is the big change in talent, is that it's not anymore only about hiring and growing your teams, but it's also now downsizing, and that we have to be kind of okay with in the startup environment as well. Also in the earlier stages, if we recognize that we don't maybe need such a large team, we'll have to be okay with downsizing the team as well.
Great, thank you. Say I'm hiring my first employees or looking for co-founders. Is there something I should keep in mind?
Yeah, there's probably a lot. I think especially now the talent is very differently available than before. Because of this environment, many people that are working in the growth companies could be that they're looking for new opportunities. It might be that their options are not as valuable as they used to be. It could be that they feel stressed about their current work environment. So you can actually do great hires in this kind of environment, or find co-founders because of this, because many are looking for new opportunities to join and start something new. And I think maybe another point is that, of course, kind of less is more. Maybe in this particular time, is that there's also a lot of technologies that you can use to kind of increase the productivity of your teams. Everything from Chat GPT, Copilot, etc., coming to the market, and you can actually build a lot more efficient teams and get more done with a smaller team, I think. So I think that's when you're doing the first hire, I think that's kind of significant, particularly now.
Is there a story you could share on this?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, with Starcart, who's also based here, an e-commerce aggregator. We were looking for a head of growth, and used a recruiter to do that as well. I think the candidate that we then got in was in exactly this kind of environment. So his current startup, he wasn't certain where the future of that is, and he felt uncertain about it. So we managed to do actually a fantastic hire because of this. That maybe in another environment wouldn't have been possible. And then being well funded, it was kind of an easy switch for that person.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, what do investors look in for individuals in the team, or the founder, or however you want to elaborate on this?
Yeah, it's a complex question. And of course, every single person will always tell you that you have a great team, that your team is fantastic. I think no startup really ever receives nowhere the feedback that your team isn't great. But the reality is that not all the teams are great. And rarely we would even share that feedback, to be honest, to the startups that we decide not to invest in, because it creates a non-productive dialogue if we start criticizing the team. So of course, typically there are other reasons then as well why we don't invest. But what I would say most investors are looking for in teams, and especially single founders, individual founders, are looking for this kind of humble, smart kind of attitude, I would say. So a person that's very eager to learn, easy to adapt to new knowledge, and at the same time they have like a fast clock speed in thinking about new ideas. A good example of that is for instance the Swappie founders. When we met them, just even the pace of talking with those guys is immense. And the amount of data that they drop to you in sentences is kind of blows your mind up. So whenever we're asking a question like, hey, what's your gross margin, or how many suppliers you have, they already had the data that yesterday we bought this many iPhones and yesterday we had this many suppliers. So they really were on top of things, and that really showed us and gave us the confidence that they know what they're doing. And at the same time, they were kind of very humble in, if you gave them feedback, they were like, yeah, this is probably an area that we haven't looked into. We'll have to look into that. But they were not building their company for the investors. They had their strong vision, but they took feedback very well. And I think another one is kind of the communication skills, or the pitching skills, or how do you want to call that? One of the largest venture capital funds, Partech, they're one of their oldest partners, was telling me, well, that these days he kind of over indexes when he invests the communication, the English proficiency. So how well can you actually articulate the story that you're doing? Because it is a lot about selling. You're selling to the investors, you're selling to the first investors, you're selling to the customers, employees, everyone, all the time. You're kind of selling the story and what you're building. So if you're a great storyteller, that really comes across as well, and that's an important skill to have as a founder. And then maybe another one is if you look at more the team, is who have you been able to hire to your team we were raising an A round with a startup based in Helsinki, and we went really far with a B2B SaaS investor called Notion. I would say they're one of the top investors in Europe in B2B SaaS. And one of the main reasons they passed was that they were unsatisfied about the profiles that that team had hired. So they felt that they've been mostly hired junior people or from their network instead of trying to hire someone that's really high caliber. And the reason why they were looking at that, one was that they feel like if you want to create a massive business, you have to be great at hiring and attracting massive talent. And if you don't prove that early on, it is difficult for them to believe that you will get to do that in the future. And second is that when you do these great maybe C-level hires, it shows that you have the ability to delegate also your work forward. So if you only hire from your network or you hire a bit more junior team, it shows that maybe you want to only control all the releases yourself, so you're not ready to openly share the workload and the responsibility with others.
Great. So, say if I didn't identify myself in those aspects, those topics there, is there something I can do to become such a person?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I was trying to think beforehand. How do you kind of become such a founder that's attractive to investors? Because no one was that when they were born. Everyone learned that skill. So every single person in the world can become that founder that kind of ticks the box, and everyone feels like he's a great founder. I think one is that you start to kind of understand the wider international startup ecosystem. You don't only look at what's happening in Finland, you understand what's happening kind of globally, what's the narrative, what things we're talking about, what words do we use. And I think second is that you try to spend time with such founders that have been able to raise. You see how do they speak, how do they tell their story, what narratives do they use, so you kind of understand what kind of great looks like. If you live in your own network and within your own small circles, most likely you'll ever meet someone that's the fundraiser of the year. But if you spend, let's say, half an hour with Mikki Kuusi from Wolt, you'll understand immediately why probably people would have invested in him such large sums of money. And then you can surround yourself easily with media that's relevant as well, Twitter, podcasts, whatever. There's plenty of things out there, so you can understand what the wider tech ecosystem is looking for. So kind of global mindset, I would say, is key.
Interesting. So, the previous topics have been on the founder aspect.
Yep.
You did briefly mention on about how investors might look at the larger team. Is there something you could share what investors look for when they assess the whole team?
Yeah, I'll touch upon the hiring aspect, but I think another one is kind of looking at your team as a complementary set of skills. For instance, well, if I go back to Wolt, when they founded, we all know Mikki Kuusi, and he's kind of the super champion, but actually there were 7 founders that were really complementary to each other. There was one of the best iOS developers in Finland. There was one of the best UX designers in Finland, some of the best backend developers in Finland, and some of the best PR people in Finland. They were all within that one team of 7. And of course, we had Mikki, who had built a fantastic story with Slush, but it was the whole team that actually made the difference. It wasn't only him. And that's the thing that we too often see. Like we have a lot of students here, so we often see teams that are, hey, we were 3 business school students that started this new tech startup, but there is no one that knows how to code. There's no one that actually understands the product. So building a complementary, diverse team from the beginning is key that we don't see enough. And then I think kind of second is the kind of founder market fit, that you know what you're building towards. Like if we could pick any team in Europe, would this team have all the kind of capabilities within that team that is needed to build towards this larger opportunity? And then I have to kind of third point that I forgot already. Oh yeah, and then it's kind of related to the hiring part, that if you build your team around the best friends that you have in your network, is that really the best possible team to build towards a startup? Or is the best team and co-founders actually outside of your own network? Rarely your kindergarten best friend is the best AI developer in Europe. If it is, then you've been really, really lucky, but in most cases it's not. So really strive for excellence when you're looking for co-founders and employees.
So touching on the last point you made there, where does one start looking for these people?
Yeah.
Would it be relevant to start building an option pool? When does that come in?
Yeah, good point. So I think where do you start? I mean, it's through your network. You'll probably start asking questions like, "Hey, I'm looking for a co-founder that is best at XYZ. Where should I start?" And then through your network, you'll start to get references on a individual or individuals. Typically, if let's say you're working something industrial tech, probably you want to be in industrial tech events, asking there and trying to find someone. And I said, now it's kind of the time when a lot of people might be thinking of leaving their existing organization. So it might be a very good time just directly reach out. Everyone eats a lunch, is interested to hear about new ideas. So it's in Finland, in this small pond that we're in, it's very easy to get connected with people. And then touching upon the option pool, I think that's the incentive when you hire new people. You probably don't have a lot of money to hire people, so you'll have to pay average or lower salary that the person would get elsewhere. But with an option pool, that's the way you attract those talent and also save your own runway when you go forward. So for many people that understand the kind of options, that option is more valuable for them personally than the actual salary. But maybe the sad truth is, than what we've seen in multiple startups, many people, maybe even in this room, don't really know what an option pool is, don't really understand what's really the value out of it, have seen only failed successes when you've been promised options, but they never delivered any euro to your bank account. And this is the sad truth, that there is not enough good examples of this. So you really have to show and tell and sell almost your options to the employees. I mean, for instance, Swappie, we built decks for our employees, showing exactly what's the possibility for you to gain with these options. So that's really something that I would pay attention, is that, of course, you have to understand it yourself, but then the second part is to know how to sell it to different employees and what's the potential there.
So would this be more for the senior hires than?
Yeah, that's a good question, because so for instance, Swappie, everyone gets options, so everyone is part of the option pool. But we've been in other startups that haven't been in that democratic path. So this varies in what's your philosophy in building that company. Do you want to incentivize everyone with option and ownership, or do you want some people to be only with salary? And I think that's something that you have to dictate on what fits your team culture the best. We've seen both working well. I'm personally leaning towards the kind of more democratic side, where everyone is incentivized with some options, just because it's kind of fair in the type of business you're in. And I think then it pulls people together towards the same larger goal as well.
Interesting. If there's any more questions you have on that, we'll have a Q&A bit in a few minutes. Let's talk a bit about hiring and expansion.
Yeah.
So what are the common pitfalls of hiring?
Yeah, we had a list of probably 100 here, so I had to narrow that down. I mean, the most common advice startups get, and I of course have to tell that as well, is kind of hiring slow. And what that means in practice is that kind of for a senior recruitment, it probably takes 6 months from when you realize that you need someone for that person to start. And before you start hiring, you actually lay out the process of, this is what the steps of hiring are. This is what we're going to ask in every single interview phase. and the more structured that is, and the more you stick actually to that process, because often we lay out the process, but then we cut corners in the process. When we find a friend that actually fits the process, the better result it actually, I think, ends up with. And also, since these people will be joining the journey for a very long time, often 5-10 years, especially the early hires are very critical. So you have to really consider hard, like, is this really the best possible person that I'm hiring? Then a typical problem often is that you don't hire for the kind of culture match, that you hire this one that has collected all the right logos and looks like a stellar superstar. Often maybe they are not, so you don't understand that, you don't interview or try to understand based on references, is this person actually a culture match to our team. Those are probably the two that we've seen the most. Then there's a lot of others as well. One maybe on that. One very typical thing that happens when we go out hiring is that we typically, on startups, we put out a job ad on the website and we kind of expect people to come. And when we as investors and you as founders, you always think like, this is like, everyone knows about us. We're the biggest in this particular category. Like we are the star. And you look at how many people have seen your LinkedIn post, etc. The reality is that no one knows, no one cares. So you really have to go down to hunt people. So the job ad is nice. It will be good for marketing, but the way you really get the right candidates is you really have to dig in and hire them directly from other companies. The great people that have that specific niche in this niche skill that you need most likely are really wanted by hundreds or thousands of startups as well. So you really have to go hunt those people. They won't come to you for say. So it's about sourcing, not waiting and kind of building a pool. When you are in the size of Wolt, then yes, then you're gonna get people from open applications, but most likely you really have to hunt down for the people.
Cool. Then, what's a kingmaker?
Oh yeah. There's also Umbra here. I think that happened with Umbra as well. That during the 7 years, I've seen a lot of these kind of roles that we've hired, especially for sales, like a person that we feel that this will change the whole organization. We hire this one individual. I mean, all our problems are solved. And this has happened, I think, repeatedly, where it's never about that one person. That person will never make that size of an impact. You need to build the team around him. You need to build the organization. You need to build a structure. Yes, so one person can change the direction of a team or can do an outsized impact, but they will never like solve all your problems. I think then you have fundamental problems somewhere else, as if you're kind of expecting that the new hire will trickle down everything. So we often internally talk about this kind of kingmaker that will solve all the problems, but really doesn't move the needle. And then it might become very costly to fire someone like this. And one startup, at least in Finland, and maybe the story goes a bit round as well, that they spent, I think, was it 150K just to lay off a person like this that they had hired, but it was just a wrong culture match for the team. So that's how expensive it can get.
So even though kingmaker sounds fancy,
yeah,
you don't
exactly.
want it necessarily.
No.
Cool. So talking about hiring and how it's important to find the right fit and not just recruit from your own network, should one use a recruiter?
Previously, I always felt like startups should do the recruiting themselves, and that's kind of such a key skill for you. But noticing how kind of great recruiters make really a difference, because often founders don't have enough time and they don't have the background of actually recruiting and sourcing for people. So hiring a recruiter, and a great recruiter, because there's very different kinds of recruiters, might make a difference, because you can build a lot more diverse pool of candidates. And if you can afford getting a recruiter, especially for the, let's say, VP onwards, so quite senior people. I would definitely recommend maybe looking into that, and then just properly assess whether the recruiter makes a difference compared to the ones that you're looking for. Yeah, so if you can afford it, and often I think you should afford it, I would definitely consider that, unless you have someone in your team that you feel confident about running a recruiting process yourself.
Thank you. And thank you, Lauri. Thank you all. We have reserved some time for questions now. I have two colleagues around with microphones, Annika at the back and Jessica here at the front. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and you'll get a microphone. Do we have any questions? Yes.
The first brave one always.
Hi, I'm Marcus. Do you have any stories about hiring enterprise software sales teams in Europe for expansion? Because those guys, they know their worth and they can be quite slippery ones.
Yeah, I mean, trying to think of an example, but I mean, the typical maybe rule of thumb is that probably the second or the third person you hire to that role will actually do something, because it's very difficult to hire salespeople. And that's typically exactly the thing, that if they apply to you, most likely they are not the ones that are really closing sales in their current organization, and that's why they're looking for a new job. So I would really much hunt people down, and then through references try to see what they've actually achieved. And yeah, then maybe there's a lot of good interview questions as well, and there's a lot of sources out there on how do you hire salespeople, because as you said, it's very difficult to know what's behind the line, and often, I mean, what we've done, I think very often we've done in the good hires, we've done it like a proper case. So they've properly we push them during 2 or 3 days to build a sales strategy, or give us the first 10 customers that you would try to hunt down or something like this, to properly get them working before they actually start working. But yeah, most of them fail, to be honest. You'll have to hire a second or third in order to make it.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll ask a continuation question.
Go ahead.
How do you feel about local teams in enterprise sales? Or can we nowadays sort of run sales from Nordics to European countries into global scale?
Very specific question that I'm not maybe the right expert, but I think in most industries, in kind of enterprise sales, I think you still have to be face to face, and you have to have local networks. I work a lot with real estate and construction industry, for instance, and there for sure you'll need someone that speaks the local language and has the local network. But it might be that it's some industries. For instance, if you're doing enterprise sales to, let's say, software teams, probably you can do everything remote and from Helsinki as well. But I would presume if you are in more industrial setting that you'll have to hire a local team often. But I mean, for these kind of specific questions, I would always go, there's always another startup in Finland or Nordics that has had exactly that problem. And it's very quick to ask them. And you'll very quickly find the person that has been doing that particular problem and thinking through that. So I think that's what I would recommend with these kind of tactical things, that don't try to think it in your own head only.
I'm Lena. I'm a recruiter in DataCrunch company, and I want to confirm that it's a great idea to hire a recruiter, even when you are maybe 10 people on board. And I have a question. You mentioned that there was a story that investors were not satisfied with the quality of team.
Yeah.
But what was it about? It is about name of companies in the background, or competences, or what?
I think in the kind of shallow phase, it's about like the people you hired and the background of those people. Were they in large tech organization that the investor would recognize, would be a plus. But I think the bigger thing was for them, it was about the seniority of these people. So they had hired really junior people to their team, and there was no one that they've added to the kind of management team within 2 years. They didn't need to, if thinking from the organization perspective, but from this investor's perspective, they felt like there was a kind of bad signal. And then when they interviewed the founders, or where have you hired these people, they recognized that a lot of them were from their network. So they were saying like, hey, this guy I hired from my previous company, this one was my neighbor's daughter or something like this. Not like, hey, we hired a recruiter, we ran a process and we did 100 people. We had candidates from Wolt, Swappie, Avon, but we picked the one from Wolt. The story is very different between these two. So it's also how the founder, what's the story that they then managed to tell on why did they particularly picked that person, for instance, for enterprise sales.
Thank you. Why I asked about it, I've read one article with an idea that you shouldn't hire talents, or not talents, but stars in the beginning, in an early stage startup. So
Yeah.
it's better to hire them in maybe when you are scale up. What is your opinion of that?
I mean, I would always look at like, what do you really need? You would have to identify the gaps that you have within your team. If you're really self-aware, which I think is a very important skill for founders, you'll understand that, hey, our team is lacking this capability. And often you might need to hire a star, even in the early stage. And now what is early stage? I mean, probably up to, let's say, 10 employees, you don't need to hire anyone very senior like a superstar. But when you cross 10 employees, probably you'll have to hire someone to your kind of management team. And then that's the point you have to understand, like, what's the gap that we're lacking? Is it sales? Is it tech? Is it marketing? What's the key role that will get us to the next stage? So I think it comes from within, like, objectively recognizing what we have, and then your board members or some advisors can support you on that, trying to get objective view, because yourself it's very difficult to do that, of course.
I have one question more.
Go ahead.
Okay. I know that some companies, they even have communication leads or ambassadors. It's not recruiters, but it's people from business, and maybe they could be a speaker on events, they could be lecturers in the universities, and this is the way they attract candidates. So if you have such experience, what do you think, at what stage you should have that people, and to pay them even for that, like extra pay, like motivation for them?
We haven't hired, I don't remember a company where we've hired someone like that in the early stages. Often maybe they have an advisor that is a professor in a university. For instance, if they look for quantum computing expertise, they have an advisor that is a professor that can acquire that talent and point them to the right direction, the right persons, or already within the founder team, someone is a person like that. So they are active with the university or that particular community. Well, they'll know that they'll have to hire a lot of people. So if you are already in the right network, which you probably should be as a founder team, then you'll have within the team already someone. And I think kind of brings to the point of using the whole team for recruiting, that everyone in the team should feel responsible and be rewarded on hiring as well. It's not one person that can do your job. Everyone has to do it. That's how difficult it is. And uses everyone's network to find those talents. For instance, developers, the classic example. You have to always build an incentive model for your developers to bring their best colleague from your previous company. So you give them 1 month salary or whatever to encourage them and motivate them as well to bring new talent on board.
Excellent questions so far. We've still got time for one question. If there's no yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Lauri, for a great presentation. Andrei Shigaev, Specialises. What would be your rule of thumb or expectation for a rule of thumb for distribution of equity among employees in this democratic kind of approach for the options?
you mean how much does one employee get, basically?
Yeah, kind of rule of thumb.
Yeah, rule of thumb.
What is healthy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Often, this varies a lot if you're 1,000 or 10 employees. So there is
Early stage.
early stage. Let's say a rule of thumb for senior recruitment is something between 0.5% to 1%. Like if you're hiring the first, let's say, employees, that's the senior level. And then when you go downwards, it could be anything to 0.01 even.
But would it motivate people at all?
For some, I mean, if you're Swappie, 1,000 employees, there are people that are doing quite, let's say, repetitive work. So for them, it's more of a signal than actually the monetary value of it. And then for those, there's a really good kind of table built by Index Ventures. So if you Google Index Ventures and option pool, they built a very good guidebook on how do you build option pools, what's the percentage that people should get based on salaries, etc. It's one of the really top resources for building the option pool.
Cool, thanks.
Great, thank you all. Thank you, Lauri.
Thank you. It was great being here.
If you have any questions you're afraid of asking through a microphone, I think Lauri's going to hang around for a few more minutes, so you can grab him by the sleeve and ask any questions you have, or then find another way to reach him. Do you want to share any of your do you want to be contacted on some?
Yeah. My email is always open. It's lauri@inventure.vc. It's on our website if you don't remember it. So yeah, send me email anytime, and I respond to cold emails as well. Maybe not tomorrow, but as I will always respond, or on Twitter or LinkedIn, whatever the easiest way for you is. Thanks a lot.